Company is a growing platform for women to discuss how they create, build, and live. I am In Her Company's founder and creator. I am also a published author, consultant to multi-passionate women, and socialpreneur. My name is Chris Vaughn. Welcome.
Nicole Evelina is a USA Today bestselling author telling the stories of strong women from history and today. Her books have won more than 40 awards, and one, Madam Presidentis, was previously optioned for film. Nicole was named Missouri's top independent author by Library Journal, BiblioBoard's 2018 Missouri Indie Author Project winner, and recipient of the Sarton Women's Book Award, among others. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications, including the Huffington Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, and Curve magazine. Nicole joins us to discuss the path that led her to tell these stories, developing the courage to live our own and create the ones we want to leave behind. Nicole, welcome to In Her Company.
Hi, Chris. Thank you very much for having me.
So what's your path to becoming an author? Was this intentional, or were you en route to another destination?
No, it was not intentional at all. I went to college intending on being in international business. That was my major. My minor was in English because I knew I loved to read and I enjoyed writing as a hobby, but that's all it was at that point. I didn't even take creative writing classes in college because I didn't think I was creative enough. I had plans on working all over the world, and I really enjoyed my marketing class, so I figured I would probably do something in that, but beyond that, I didn't know. I really wanted to work at the World Trade Center. I was in college when September 11th happened, and
wow.
I remember sitting in the cafeteria because it all basically happened when I was on my commute from home to school. And the cafeteria was the only place that had a TV. And I remember sitting there with a guy named Sean, who was also an international business major. We both had plans on working in the World Trade Center. In addition to that being such a horrific day for humanity and so tragic on a personal level, which is by far less than so many people experienced. But, we sat there and both watched our dreams literally fall apart. That was the day I went, okay, that's obviously not the path for me. But Interestingly, while I was in college, it was probably about 2 years before that. Yeah, it was 1999. That was when I first started writing something that I thought might be not necessarily publishable because my brain wasn't there yet, but it might be actually worth something. That ended up being Daughter of Destiny, my debut novel. And it really took, it took about 10 years for that to go from something I just did when I was bored to, oh my gosh, I think I might actually have something here. I need to learn about how one becomes a published author. Yeah, if you would have told me I was going to be an author, I would have told you were crazy.
You know what? And I'm doubtful if that changes much once you do. So.
No, we just know we're crazy once we actually become authors.
Yeah, because then the characters start talking to you, and it's like, whose voice is this? So, at least that was something definitive. I can just imagine, sitting there, especially when you're around other people who you're on the same path with, and most of us don't see our dreams literally blow up like that. And, it's no pun intended, but we usually go down the wrong path, spend a few years there and decide, this is not what I thought it was. But for you guys, it was immediate. So I'm sure that left a tremendous impact, to say the least.
I became scared of flying after that because I was afraid it was going to happen again.
Yeah, many people were.
Yeah. So I didn't even travel as much as I had before. Obviously I'm over that now. I still have a little apprehension, I have to say, every time I board a plane, but it's doable now. And I'm hoping, in the future that maybe my author career will be what ends up taking me international. And, I end up doing what I thought I was going to do, but in a completely different way.
And that's usually how it happens, and is usually so much sweeter when it does, because we have the idea, but how that actually unfolds is, a different story. But being an author and becoming good at writing can be a gradual process, even for the most talented. But what has kept you writing?
The main thing for me is that I see so many stories in the world that I feel like need to be told, and not all of them are necessarily the stories for me. I know what I'm good at, and I know the stories that I'm attracted to. It's interesting that when one comes up, I will know immediately if it's right for me or not. I have two fans that one lives in Canada, one lives in England, and they're related. And they are determined to get me to write about this one particular historical woman. And the story just doesn't resonate with me. It's not that it doesn't need to be told, because it does, but I just don't have that immediate pull where I know that this is a story to put on my list. I have characters that sometimes literally argue with each other in my head over whose story is next. So that's, the big thing that keeps me going is, I feel like I owe it to these characters or these people to tell their stories. And the other thing is, occasionally I'll come across somebody in my research for another book and go, oh my God, people need to know about this person. My whole thing is to tell the stories of unknown or little known women, whether they're from literature or from actual history. And in some ways that is a blessing, because, it is an educational process, and that's part of the reason why I do what I do. But it also can be a problem because the publishing industry really wants names people already know because they're guaranteed to sell. So, in some ways I'm making it difficult on myself for telling these unknown stories, but yet, we've seen with books like Hidden Figures and A Woman of No Importance, that times these books of unknown important women really can break through. So I'm just going to stick to what I feel like is my mission, and, do what feels right for me, regardless of, how it may turn out financially. Because for me, yes, money would be great.
Of course.
But that's not what I'm in this for. I'm in this for doing what I as one person can do to show other women that we don't hear a lot in history about women who are strong, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually.
Right.
And I want as many women as possible to know they are out there. Even if a particular woman that I write about, her story doesn't, resonate with you, there might be somebody else that you find out about, even just having an open mind and an open heart. Yeah, for me, this is much more than a career. It's a personal mission.
That response was heavy. That was very insightful. It's a lot that we can draw from right there. I think it's excellent that you do know what stories, of course, resonate with you, and that you're not telling the stories just to tell the stories of another woman, which you're aware is some of the feedback that's common, not only from men, but from other women as well. It's like, here's another story, and, this is just, they only wanted to tell it because it has a female character and whatnot. So in line with that portion of your response, what is it? Could you tell us just two things that confirms that this is a story that you should be telling, or either two ways that hey, this is a wonderful story. The woman was powerful, but I can't do her story justice, or just simply I'm not the one to tell it?
The main thing for me, it's a literal gut response. It's an actual feeling that and I wish I could explain it. It's like any other gut instinct that you have. Another criteria that I use is, has her story been told before? And if so, has it been told well? And, well is subjective. That's my personal opinion. Like, I'm going to use an example from mythology. I've written books about Guinevere. I was not the first person to write about her. I'm actually continuing a tradition that began in the late 1970s and early 1980s of women giving Guinevere her due. And that same extent, I want to eventually tell Isolde's story, because in my book, Isolde is her best friend. She's a very lively, fiery character. And quite honestly, when she came into my head, she made me promise that I would give her own book.
Like, you better not even write my name unless you promise to give me my own story.
So, there was a wonderful series, and I won't name the author, but that I read a good 15, 20 years ago. I loved the first book in the series, but I hated the second two. And so I feel like, to me, there's more that can be done. I mean, I'm just going to tell it, or at least my plan is I'm planning on telling her story in one book. But again, my Isolde is so different from hers that, yes, they're the same character, and yes, they draw from the same myth, but they're going to be two completely different stories. To give you a historical example, I read something about, I can't think of her first name now, the Roosevelt daughter. Anyway,
okay.
I read something about her, about how feisty she was, and I was like, oh, I might have to put her on my list. And one of my friends said, Stephanie Marie Thornton just wrote about her in a book called American Princess. I'm like, okay, I need to read that first, because if I end up liking her book, which I fully plan to because I love her writing, then that's somebody whose story has been told well, and I don't need to add her to my list.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for that. You also drew another important point, which is, and we'll get into this more later in the interview, but telling the story of unknown people, or people who are, unknown or little known people, that is often, and we've seen it time and time again, not only in books, but in movies as well. People like to say this is the history that's been forgotten. And when I hear that, I tend to remind people that, no, this is not the history that's forgotten. This is the history that was intentionally left out, or this is the history that was intentionally, in some cases, erased, or worse, depending on how you look at it, manipulated to suit someone else's agenda. So when we hear the stories in their pure form, or we hear these things, they resonate with us because there's an overwhelming sense of truth that comes along with its delivery, but it's also because this is what's missing. And on some level, I believe that we recognize that, and that it begins to fill in the gaps and helps us create, our own missing pieces as a result of that. So there is definitely, and there always will be, a place for these so-called unknown stories.
At one point, I think it's important to bring up, we tend to blame men in general for that erasure of women from history. And for the most part, that is true. History is written by the victors, and those have traditionally been men who have had various, motivations. They either didn't think women were worth writing about, or, purposefully wanted to keep their own power, whatever it may have been. But it isn't just men. Women have done this to ourselves as well. My book, Madam Presidentis, is about Victoria Woodhull, the first woman who ran for president in the United States back in 1872. That's 48 years before women even got the right to vote. She is she's kind of coming out of the shadows within the last, I would say, 6 to 10 years. People have been paying more attention to her. But before that, she was a literal footnote in the history of women's suffrage. And that was Susan B. Anthony's doing on purpose. You wouldn't think that a bastion, of women's rights would do something like that, but they had a personal grudge with each other. Victoria really irritated her. And I mean, Susan had everything. Well, I mean, Victoria basically said to the women in the suffrage movement toward the end of her candidacy that, if you don't stop talking smack about me, I've got my own newspaper, I've got your secrets, and I will publish them. So, I mean, they had a right to be mad at her. But because of that, and because of what Susan B. Anthony and probably Elizabeth Cady Stanton as well considered Victoria being an embarrassment to the women's movement, and she was to an extent, even though she was also very good for the women's movement. You know, when they went to write their 800-page, it's a 6-volume set of the history of women's suffrage from the beginning to women getting the vote. They talked about the fact that she owned a newspaper. They talked about the fact that she was the first woman to speak before the Senate Judiciary Committee of Congress on women's suffrage. Mm-hmm. But that was, I mean, they didn't talk about her presidential run. You know, they didn't talk about all of the other wonderful things that she did. And because of that, and also because of a very critical biography that came out right after Victoria's death that was mostly made up, it turns out.
Wow.
Women buried her. You know, it was, she isn't someone we want to be associated with. She isn't someone we want to hold up as a role model. And she became forgotten. And it wasn't until women's history programs really took off in the late 70s and early 80s that women began to look at her story and to retell it. And some of that included some of the lore that was in that unfortunate biography. You call it a biography in air quotes because it's it was more like an extended National Enquirer story. I mean,
wow.
This woman who wrote it, and it was written by another woman who wrote it. She literally paid people for stories and to make stuff up.
So sensationalism at its finest.
Yeah. And it's interesting that now scholars are even starting to become critical of those early biographies of Victoria and say, let's look at what was in the newspaper and, you know, what we can verify for sure from contemporary sources and look at her life that way. There's a website called the Woodhull Project. That's what it is. It's a group of historians. I think there's an author in there too, and that's what they're doing. They're re-examining the story to try to get at the truth of the matter because it's been so painted over by other women.
Yeah, and it's been such a long time. So
yes, yeah.
Wow.
Victoria died in 1920 something.
Mm-hmm.
She lived to get to see women get the right to vote. She was. We don't think she actually got to vote because she was living in England and she was so old and ill at that point that the travel would have been.
That she couldn't have. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it would be beautiful to be able to say that she did, but it just doesn't sound likely.
Oh, yeah. That's the women pointing their swords at each other rather than a root cause of issues. Obviously, like as you just mentioned, you are well researched and, you know, of course, doing your numerous years of studying and not only writing women's history, which I find absolutely just fascinating because you easily tell these stories, and I take it as because you're surrounded and you dove into them and you're surrounded by them all the time. But at what point, though, did you decide to take it up on yourself to tell their stories? Because there's one thing to research for a particular project is another thing, which people still consider that ideal, somewhat novel for people, male or female, to actually study women's history. But to take it up on yourself to tell their stories, that's totally different.
Yeah, you know, I was actually thinking about the other day, trying to remember how all this got started. And when I really look at it, it goes back sometime in the early 90s. Like, I don't remember exactly the exact date or how old I was. I was still pretty young. I would say probably in high school. Yeah, high school would make sense. I was in high school from 93 to 97. Mm-hmm. And I was okay. So here's a story about how things you don't think are going to affect you really can. I was a huge fan. Yeah. I was a huge fan of The Young and the Restless.
Me too. Watched it every day with my mom.
You may know the storyline I'm going to reference. I was in love with Michael Damian. So, you know, any of the storylines that had to do with Danny and Cricket and Michael Baldwin.
Heck yeah.
I'm sorry for the listeners who talking about, but really there is a point here. So there was a storyline where Michael Baldwin, who is this attorney, who was in love with Cricket, who was Danny Romalotti's wife. He wanted to frame Danny and make it look like he was having an affair. So he hires this woman named Rebecca Andrews to drug Danny. You got to remember, this is a soap opera.
Yeah.
And, they basically staged it to look like they were, in bed together, like something had happened. Well, when Michael's plan comes out and it divides Cricket and Danny, and what's going to happen, he decides Rebecca is useless. He has no need for her anymore. And of course, in typical soap opera fashion, she stupidly says, well, I'm going to go and tell them everything. Well, he ends up almost
good luck with that.
Yeah, basically leaves her for dead. You see this scene where she's in the woods, unconscious, covered in leaves, except for like the bruises on her face. And that impacted me so much. They ended up with the storylines going ahead and having her found, had her go to the hospital, but she couldn't talk, so nobody knew who she was, and then she died. The fact that she died without anybody knowing who she was impacted me so much. I mean, this will tell you about, me being crazy author. I actually took a random piece of concrete that we had at my house. I think it might have been part of a brick at one point, and carved the name Rebecca into it, took it into the woods close to my house, and gave her a gravestone.
Wow.
And it was at that point that the idea of someone, especially a woman, dying without her story being told really took root in my heart and really affected me. For years upon years after that, decades even, I didn't even really think about it. But then when I started telling these stories of women who have been glossed over or lost or forgotten, I started realizing that I was doing it because I had that experience, and I didn't want any other woman's memory to go through, even though that was a fictional character.
Yeah, but you can connect with that, though. Yeah. Because even though the character was fictional, it's real world, reality. Yeah. It really happens.
Yeah, there are so many women, whether they are kidnapped or part of human trafficking, or just a victim of a warped mind. And those can even be relatives.
Right.
There are so many women who have gone missing, and we don't know what happened to them. I mean, I know that's a kind of a depressing story, but yet for me, it ended up being something so motivating and so positive.
No, it's not depressing at all. That's, a powerful catalyst right there. I'm listening to you and I see so many, it's no wonder that we actually connected, because there are so many similarities, different experiences and different paths that I also have walked, that we have, because one of the reasons that I started in her company was to give a platform to women and for their voice. I started out pursuing technology, and I saw that it had ways to level the playing field for, a wide variety of not only people, but wide variety of situations. And that's only continued to be the case, but exponentially so. And I also found myself around women who were very well knowledgeable, credible, their experience, their expertise, the same, if not more, than their better known counterparts. And it seriously irritated me. And I'm thinking this was about 2 decades ago now. Wow, almost 2 decades ago. And it seriously irritated me that they weren't getting the attention, that no one knew them, and that not only did no one know them, they didn't even know each other. And so, like you, I like to think that In Her Company is playing its part in not only bringing women together, but to give them a platform for their voice, to provide them with opportunities that they can use to springboard their ideas and to come together. Yeah, no, that's a powerful catalyst right there. You have obviously a wealth of knowledge that spans the time of women's history. And in your opinion, out of all that you've seen, what are the two most important stories that women should know of themselves? And what are two that, in your opinion, they should just totally eliminate from their lives? And that's a loaded question, but I'm leaving it open for you to take it however you want.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer because there is so much of our history that has been hidden from us. But one theme I see over and over again, it doesn't matter the time period, is the difference women can make when we come together. And I'm going to give several different examples of that and have those kind of suffice as the two stories, because it's honestly more than two. If you look at around the time, it's post-revolution in America, around the time of the suffrage movement. France was going through its own revolution. That was mostly led by women, at least in the beginning. And that's something that a lot of people don't know. I actually learned about it through a wonderful book. It's kind of an anthology in that there are many different authors. There are like 7 or 8 authors, but each story links together and tells one story. It's really, really cool. It's called Ribbons of Scarlet. And I learned so much about the French Revolution. Honestly, the introduction to that book in and of itself should win an award, because it is so good talking about the empowerment of women and again, telling the stories that have been forgotten. But in our own American history, every time there's a war, women come together, and we do so much behind the scenes to keep the country going. That was the case during the Revolutionary War, but more so the Civil War and World War II. You know, we know about, because of Rosie the Riveter and other icons like her, we know a little bit more about World War II. But
because Wonder Woman also came out of that period.
Yes. Women really do keep the home fires burning. We're the ones who keep the country running, while the men, because women couldn't at that point, and yes, there were a few exceptions, the men are off fighting. There's the fact that, women came together in hospitals and nursing units, here and in Europe, with World War II, and literally saved lives. And during the Civil War, that was lives of every color. It depended on where you were, how tolerant, obviously, the different institutions were. Here in St. Louis. We had the St. Louis Union Ladies Union Aid Society, and originally that was supposed to be only for Union soldiers. But they quickly found out that, there's a way bigger need than just the Union. We're going to treat anybody. And they ended up at Jefferson Barracks, which is still a venerated military institution here. They ended up having a whole separate unit for African-American soldiers and a place for them to both gather, when they were starting African-American units and when they were healing. And there ended up being so much good that came out of that, both in the empowerment of the women, because for the first time, these women were given positions of responsibility outside of the home. They were leading things. They were learning about, how to handle finances, how to, make limited rations last, how to feed and clothe and everything else, all of these other soldiers. There were battles that just literally overwhelmed the city. I speak of St. Louis just because this is where I live, and, I know.
And that's my home, so yes.
When women come together, the power that we have, you can look at the suffrage movement for that too. That took almost 75 years.
Yes.
The bigger part of it, at least, and we had to fight in waves over and over and over and over to be allowed to vote. That we're often told we were granted the right to vote, as like, and, and we use that language because we're so used to it, but it was really that we fought for it and won it. And it was through sheer determination of generations of women. As far as the two stories that women need to forget, I will preface this first one by saying I am not anti-male. I love men, you know.
Yeah, of course.
What I am anti is patriarchy and, you know, chauvinism.
There is a difference.
There is.
Yeah.
The first story that we've been told for hundreds of years in society is that we need a man. You know,
yes. Okay.
We're very, very lucky in the time that we're living in now that women can be way more independent. You know, I'm 40 years old. I'm single. You know, yeah, if I meet somebody, I'd love to get married. But if I don't, I know I'm going to be fine. But I'm the first generation probably that can say that. You know, even my mom's generation into the 1970s, women, and I was born in 79, just to put this into context, women couldn't even get credit cards without their husband's signature.
Exactly. I mean, and their name became Mr., Mrs. So-and-so with the husband's first name even. They didn't even have their own first names on that.
Exactly. So, I mean, even within living memory and not even reaching far back into our grandparents, you know, darn near in my own lifetime, you know, that the story was still being told. You know, you went to school, you know, and they still joke, and it drives me crazy that women are going to college to get their MRS. And no, we're going to college to get our masters, our PhDs. You know, there are more women in college now.
I like how you put that.
It's true. I've heard it many times.
That was good.
You know, so the fact that we can be financially independent now, it helps us be able to shed that story for the first time. I mean, I know women of my mom's generation who said, you know, if I could have afforded a divorce, if I could have lived on my own, I would have gotten it. You know, and they managed, you know, somehow. I mean, these were women that thankfully were not in abusive relationships or anything like that. That's a completely different story.
Yes.
But, you know,
but that does play a role, though, still, that has tremendous impact, not only on women, but their families, you know, their children.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, I know women now, you know, my age and younger, who still, they go from one guy to another, regardless of whether he's good for them or not. And most of the time he's not, because they feel like they constantly need to have a man. And I think some of it is societal conditioning. A lot of it is a lack of self-esteem and a lack of self-confidence. And, you know, whatever it is that puts them in that situation. And honestly, I feel like most women have been in that situation at one point in time in their lives. I mean, I know I was. You know, I felt like I only deserved men who treated me like crap. You know, I'm lucky that I was never abused, much luckier than so many. But, you know, they didn't treat me the way I should have been, but I eventually got over that. And really that was a matter of time, experience, and support. You know, and I think it's the support that a lot of women lack. And that's why something like In Her Company, you know, is so important, that you know, women need these gathering places. You know, throughout history, women would gather around the hearth fire, you know, whether this was back in, you know, the pre-common era times, you know, when the hearth fire was the literal center of the home.
Yes, it was.
You know, it could have been the quilting circles of the Victorian era. You know, we've always had our time and our place come together. If you've ever read The Red Tent, you know, that was Anita Diamant, I think that's how you pronounce her last name. You know, that was a completely different, you know, women have our time once a month, and, you know, that came together and told our stories. And I think that's something that we've lost in modern society, as many advancements as we've had. And it's, you know, this is the best time to be alive as a woman in history, because of all of the good things that we have, but yet we've lost some of our community.
Exactly. And exactly.
I think that's something we need to look to change. And the other thing, because you asked for two stories, the other thing that I think women need to forget, this kind of goes back to what I talked about with the suffrage movement. We need to forget this culturally ingrained competition that we feel like we have with each other. There are plenty of to go around. There are plenty, and unfortunately, that's for the most part what we've been fighting over. Some of that has to do with resources, fighting for the richer man or, the one who will give the most security in some way, shape, or form. But again, because we are at a point where and not everybody, of course, but for the most part,
of course,
where women can earn their own living and don't have to be dependent, we need to get over that. This reality TV bachelorette, your bachelor.
Oh
whatever.
gosh, I can't even watch those shows.
I watched the first season and that was it. The cattiness and the we're turning against each other for no reason. The reason I mentioned the suffrage movement is there was a lot of that in the suffrage movement. Women were, the suffrage movement for a long while, was divided into two different factions. And so you had Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony on one side, Lucy Stone and a couple of other women on the other side, and they were fighting with each other over, this is the proper way to try to get women's suffrage. You're too radical, you're conservative,
Right. And then you had Ida B. Wells, who is recognized as, the leader or one of the leaders of the suffrage movement that became the Black woman suffrage movement, because they saw themselves as sisters with white women, but what was it, Susan B. Anthony, for their own means, just basically ignored them, putting it mildly. Even when they came to the parade, that was, something else. So,
and I will say, just as a matter of historical note, since we've been talking about St. Louis, the St. Louis League of Women Voters, which I am a proud member of, I'm actually on several different committees. We were the first League of Women Voters to integrate African American women into our chapter.
Yay, we got something right.
For as many racial issues as the city has, we did. We didn't want to have a separate colored chapter, which is what they were called at the time. We had women of color on our board, and one of our presidents at one time, the building that our meetings were held in, the women of color were expected to take the freight elevator up to the meeting room, whereas the other women obviously took the posh, regular elevator. And no, the president said, no, if they have to take the freight elevator, we will take the freight elevator.
Wow.
And
now that's solidarity. That's unity right there.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting. It's in different points in history, we get it right and then we lose it. And I think we are poised now more than ever to have the opportunity to get it right and keep it, mainly because, again, of the position that women are in. We are definitely at a turning point in this country in racial issues. So hopefully, whatever this fourth wave of feminism that I believe we've been in since 2016, whatever this morphs into, I'm hoping it will be obviously completely equal, but that's a little utopian because of humanity.
But I mean, that's something to hope for. That's, that vision, because it is possible. It's a matter of whether we can get over ourselves, get over our egos. And if we see power dynamics correcting themselves, if we see that as a loss or a gain for us all.
Right.
I may, and thank you for the kind words about In Her Company, by the way, because I am a firm believer that some of these issues come about because we don't know where we're supposed to be. Not only are we not honest with ourselves and do whatever work needs to be done there, but we don't know where our places are. I firmly believe there is no such thing as competition if you know what you're supposed to be doing. because there's enough for us all. There are enough resources for us all there, regardless of what those resources look like or what form that they take. But if you think the virtue that you think that someone is taking something from you by their participation in the same area, and I'm not talking about anybody that is actually trying to steal something from you. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just you entering whatever space it is and feel a threat by somebody else participating in that same space. I would say take a look on the inside. Are you where you're supposed to be? Or do you think that you're supposed to have something simply because you see the other people around you do? Like, where are your talents? Because there need not be any competition in life. That's what prevents us from coming together as well, like you said. The other thing is that great things do happen, and that's like our tagline within her company. Great things do happen when women come together. And when you say that that sense of community has been lost, people often point to, like, look at what we've done. Look at all the technological advances that we had. I'm like, technological advance is one thing, but technology is a tool. We can use that in however we want to, but is this coming together ourselves, because we have so many more resources. We have so many more things at our hands that are supposed to save us time, that are supposed to bring us together, that are supposed to collapse time frames. And yet stats show and studies show that we are at a time where people are more depressed than ever, where people are more disconnected than ever, where communication is suffering in ways that 20, 30 years ago, no one could ever foresee. And a lot of that is not, I think it's too much to place that burden on technology itself, but it has to do with what we filled our lives with versus each other. Women, I see all women as sisters, and the only flag that we wave here is sisterhood, because we know that there will be difference. Everybody has, differences. They have their own preferences, likes, dislikes, whatever. But we need to come to a point where we can see each other as sisters, no matter what that woman looks like, no matter what she is, and let that be the point that we reason from, versus this is another woman and she's trying to take something from me, or I need to, stop her, such as the example that we were talking about with Victoria Woodall and how she was treated by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Some of that warranted, some of it unwarranted, but that's a challenge, because we are a global sisterhood and we could do so much more good if we could create opportunities for us to come together rather than to fight one another. So on that note, though, how do we gain the courage to live our own stories, to be an active participant in the stories that we want to leave behind? And I ask that because just like the stories that you've run across, these women they were just living. They weren't necessarily thinking about, hey, 200 years from now, somebody's going to run across my name. They were just living their lives. But during the course of their life, they obviously did something. They obviously left some impression that now we come across their names again and we're intrigued. So, how can we gain the courage to live our lives and to create the stories that we want to leave behind?
It's definitely not easy. We as women are bombarded with all of these messages from the time that we're little, about how, we're not good enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not smart enough, we're not whatever. It takes time and life experience to overcome that. It's like we get those messages starting when we're little. And hopefully, depending on our circumstances, we also get positive messages that counteract that. But unfortunately, in the human psyche, it's so much easier to understand the negative and believe the negative and internalize it than it is the positive. I was very fortunate personally that I went to an all-girl Catholic high school.
Me too.
Which one did you go to?
I went to, there wasn't one in St. Louis, though. It was one up north, so.
Okay. But there is something about, I'm a very big proponent of single-sex education, whether it's male or female, because there's something about, especially during the formative teenage years, not having to worry about having the opposite sex there, and, not having that competition, that mean girls competition. I mean, teenage girls are going to be mean to each other regardless. I mean, we are just vicious. That's just all there is to it. But when you don't have the men there to impress and think about, and, you don't have the inherent, not in all cases, but the inherent tendency of some teachers to call upon the boys first and not give the girls a voice.
Exactly.
When you eliminate those things, it's a bit, that culture is so empowering. It's like, they didn't go there and, tell us every day, oh, you're women, you're going to change the world, blah, blah, blah. That's the type of thing that is just inherent in something like that.
Right. Because it was never a question. That was the basic understanding. You were there to become who you were designed to be. You were there to develop and to do powerful things. That was the expectation.
Yes. And, being with approximately the same women, I mean, obviously you have class changes every year, but for 4 years, it builds that bond of sisterhood. I mean, we still to this day refer to each other as sisters. It doesn't matter what generation, what class, and again, that's not the only way, to gain that confidence and that support system. I mean, thanks to social media, I'm still in touch with, I would say, 3/4 of my class. Granted, I went to a small school. My graduating class was only 111 girls, but still, I know there's a whole community that I can call upon if I need something, without batting an eye. In general, I think a strong family support system helps, again, to build that self-esteem, to help get you over all of those negative messages that you hear. But a lot of it, again, like I said, is time and life experience. I mean, there are a few women who are lucky enough to come to that type of realization in their 20s or even their early 30s. Yes. But I think you really need to go through life and to see different things happen and to see different perspectives, to be able to realize that, that you matter, that everything that you do is important, regardless of whether it seems like it now or not. Right. And a lot of it, too, is being exposed to those stories culturally. You mentioned Wonder Woman earlier. I mean, I am not a superhero person, but I loved that movie and cannot wait to see the second one.
Heck yeah.
It's the fact, that there's somebody there that shows me, I mean, even for all of the history that I've read and how lucky and blessed I have been in my life, to come to some of these realizations fairly early, to see that on the screen. I mean, I cried the entire time I watched the movie, and it was
wow.
Tears of joy. I can't imagine what, it must have been like for so many women of color to see Black Panther,
yes.
and to not only strong women, but women who look like them.
Exactly.
I have the privilege of being white and of seeing people who look like me all the time. We need more of that. And that's one thing that I'm trying to be conscious of when I make my lists of future stories to tell, is to not automatically default to women who look like me, because that is my default. There are fascinating stories of women of every color, even just within the suffrage movement, that happens to be my area of interest. That's not going to be the only story that I'm going to tell, but they're the main ones I've been exposed to. There are Native American women who fought for suffrage. There's a Hawaiian woman who fought for suffrage before Hawaii was even a state. Asian women, the way women of color have been treated in this country, the fact that, supposedly all women got the right to vote in 1920, that's not the case.
Exactly. Exactly.
It took into the 1960s, and even now we're still fighting, voter discrimination. There's...
Which is ridiculous.
We got off the subject, but yet
no, that's fine.
It all comes back together. We need that representation as well, because, that's when, if little girls can see women like themselves, regardless of whether that means skin color, it means gender identity, it means, physical appearance, whether they are disabled, women who aren't stick skinny, and see these women doing amazing things, whether it's on screen, in real life, in a book, it doesn't matter. That will then give them that seed of courage to hopefully nurture throughout life. I mean, I don't have children. I personally have no desire to have children, but yet
I have 4. You're good.
I feel in some ways like, all of the women, all of the children, the girls of the world are my kids, because I again, this goes back to feeling like I have a mission that goes way beyond myself. I want to do what I can. So, yeah, that was a long answer to your question.
No, I mean, that's good, though, because the next question that I have for you is, it piggybacks on that, which is what are some of the ways that we can free others to do the same? But before we get to that, we hear these stories, and it's great that you realize that, or that you accept the fact and the responsibility that comes with that by telling women stories from the past, you are also telling stories that the next generation of women, our daughters, our granddaughters, are going to read those same stories. So it's great that you're connected and committed to that throughout the process, rather than saying, hey, I'm putting out a book and, you could take from it what you want to or not, or interpret it how you want, which we see a lot of today, which leads to a whole bunch of confusion regarding how different histories have been left out. I always have the response and of the mind that all history is human history. There's not, and it's not a denial or meant to diminish any one ethnicities or any one culture or national history, but it's just that all our stories, like there is no American history without Black history. And the fact that we think that we can leave these histories out or do not need to know them shows the arrogance on our part and how much we feed into the status quo of maintaining that thought, that perspective. And it prevents us from, coming together and seeing each other as we are, even, ourselves. So I always encourage people to go wide. In fact, when you think that this is all that's happened, go wide, because there are, Asian women, as you mentioned, there were the first peoples or the American Indians that contributed to the suffrage movement. And if you look at a situation like these are people, people came together to do this, then you have to ask yourself, okay, when you say that people did this, are you seeing that as monolithic, that only one group of people came to do that? Because that's not what people is. If you say that people came together to do this, then you mean, white, Black, Asian, whatever the ethnicity, because the concerns are the same worldwide. So, yeah, go deep, go wide. Interesting point here, and then we'll go on. I had the opportunity to interview Linda Addison, who I'm sure you're familiar with. She's also a fellow author, but Linda Addison is the first African American woman to win the Bram Stoker Award, which is the internationally recognized award for horror fiction. And she's won that a total of 5 times now. But we were thinking, so she's, well-known, fabulous writer and produces some excellent material. In an interview, one of the things that came up was the things that go along with being first. And, people tout her in her bio when she goes to speak. They always introduce her, of course, Linda Addison, and then, her long list of accolades, because there are many. And she's the first African-American woman. And my take on first is totally different. When people hear that, their response is to applaud that, yay, you're the first, as if, you've risen, above everyone else, and, you're finally at a point where you can do this. When I hear people mention first, it's not to take away from anybody who has won that or achieved that position, but what I hear is that, oh, so you finally gotten over yourself enough to realize that other people can do this and have been doing this too.
Oh, that's so right. Yes.
You see, because they've been doing it all along. So when you think of history and, media marketing, so much plays into that being a prevalent thought that they are the first or the second. And it's like, well, what you're uncovering, even with your writing, like how many women have really done this before? What was that lady's name? Geraldo? I don't remember her name, but they said that she was the first to run for president, and this was back in the 80s.
Geraldine Ferraro.
Yes, thank you. I knew it was something, but we're finding out now. Well, no, she wasn't the first. Victoria Woodhull was. So just because you don't know something and you're unaware doesn't mean that what you see today and label as the first. It means that there were many people, but society at large ignored them. So, but anyway, stepping down because.
And many times, men were given the credit or flat out took the credit.
Yeah.
For things women did. One of the women on my future list, I'm not going to give the specifics because I don't want to give any other authors an idea, but there was hang on. Excuse me, that would be allergies.
That's okay.
There is a woman who was actually the inventor of a very popular, well-known game, which will be celebrating a big anniversary coming up in the next couple of years that I'm hoping to time my book with. But a man was given credit for it, and has been, and still is in the company's history. Sometimes the company will say, well, she invented something similar, but the game as you know it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's actually not true.
That's one of those subtleties to hide the truth or admission, because along with admitting such things comes an economic responsibility. So, yeah, I believe I know which one that is, but the other thing.
Probably do too, but
mystery for our listeners.
If you guess it, I'm very proud of you.
Yeah.
But that's one of the ones I have 2 books that I've already got the research done for. It's just the time,
awesome.
Having the time to write it, and that's I want
awesome.
to time it.
We'll look for that one to go to film too, just like they did with the story of Ford and the windshield wipers, how that came about. So, and so many other things. But so moving on, because this could take a different conversation itself, though.
Right.
So one of the things that I don't believe a lot of people know is becoming more known now, but even the story of Wonder Woman, she began as one thing, and I'm talking about starting from the comic book production up until modern up until our day. And I could kick myself for that because I had the second issue of Wonder Woman. I found it in an antique shop when I was little. And I have moved so much since then. Where that comic book is beyond me. But I did have an original second copy of the Wonder Woman comic book, and I would so love to have that again. I know it's worth a pretty penny now, but I would love to have it. So, but even her story, we saw her start out and come into prominence in World War II, but over time, they had manipulated her character to such a great extent that she gave up, her power. She went on some journey. They manipulated her story to get women to go back to the home. And in the 70s, it was women who came together to free that story and to have it re-released. And that's why it's as powerful as it is today, because the things that they had done just to her character, to her powers over the time, it was manipulated by what, men wanted, by what patriarchy wanted. And it was done because they knew women resonated with her character. So if Wonder Woman goes back to the home, if Wonder Woman, takes a boyfriend, husband, or whatnot, you should too. And so it's a powerful statement that by women coming together, we were not only able to rescue her and return her to her original power, her original glory, so to speak, but we got Nubia, who is her African sister, and also an Amazon. We got, we rescued the island. And so we left nothing on the table with that. And yay, us. But in line with that, what are some of the ways that, like this, we can also free others to do the same, to live their own stories?
I think the biggest thing is to support one another. If a woman comes to you, friend, family member, complete stranger, because you can, obviously not in COVID times, but in normal times, you can strike up a conversation in the grocery store, and say something offhand that, I've always wanted to do this, or I'm working toward this, or I have this dream, or, I'm interested in such and such. Support them, even if you don't personally think it's realistic, your opinion doesn't matter. That's not your dream. Even if it's just, a word of encouragement saying, I hope that works out for you, or, keep in touch and let me know, or if, on the opposite end, if you have, the resources to, help fund a woman, I am very lucky that a book that I'm working on right now, a friend of mine said, I want to read that book so much. If you can't get that traditionally published, I will pay for you to self-publish it.
That's awesome.
Nothing like that. Yeah, nothing like that has ever happened to me before. She, we met at work. She was an acquaintance. We had some things in common, but she has become one of my biggest fans as a writer and one of my biggest sources of support. And, she hosted my very first book signing at her house when I published my first book. That's a smaller way. Excuse me. Just listening to other women, patronizing other women in the arts, or in whatever, I say the arts because that's my area, whatever your area is, especially if it's anything STEM. I like the people who add the arts to STEM, call it STEAM or STEM.
Yeah, STEAM.
I got it. Those are areas that women are traditionally underrepresented. And, those areas need support more than anything. Respect one another. Excuse me. And it goes back to stopping that competition mindset and building that community that we're missing. There's the popular meme about, straightening another woman's crown, that we're all queens, but we need each other's help. And I really think that, some sort of support, emotional, financial, spiritual, pray for other women if you're a spiritual person.
Exactly.
it all starts there in my mind. Because without support, to me, I'm picturing in my mind as I'm talking, a plant growing in the ground. If you don't have that fertile soil for your roots, where are you going to go?
Yeah.
How are you going to, yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, we can, provide that fertile soil for one another. And, even small contributions can have significant impact. People often despise small numbers, but you shouldn't, because all you need is one.
Right.
Rather, that's all you need is one. And just to let you know, I wear my crown crooked on purpose. You best know what you're coming for. So I kind of like it, when it's to the side. So, but I'm a different type. So
it's a bit of a rakish angle. Why should
this is good.
Ask that one?
So whatever we do, we should do it fully and completely. I believe in running your heart out for whatever it is that you're doing. And your work has come up several times for adapting to film because of this. At least, that's definitely one thing, because your stories are magnificent. Your gift with writing historical fiction and even women's stories is, you read them and it's like, wait a minute, I got to go back and check this, because this is a fictional adaptation, but it just reads so well. It's easily consumed. But yeah, so several of your works have come up for adapting to film. How does that make you feel, and what would you like to see happen?
Sorry, that was my cat who has decided to join us, and I have a boy and a girl, so this is the girl. I think she feels the girl power here.
Welcome.
I am completely for film, TV, whatever adaptation. I know some authors don't like that because that means it's, people are going to change it, but they're two different mediums. So to an extent, I support the changes. My hope is that the people who bring my stories to life in another medium are respectful of the original story. Because there are some that are changed so completely, they are kind of really more just based on,
exactly.
than telling the same story.
Right.
And I know things need to change. I understand that, but I hope that it's a respectful portrayal. And it's interesting that thus far, the people who've been interested are other women, which is really neat. Because
that's awesome.
There is the company that had optioned Madame Presidentes in the past is an all-female company. So I was really hopeful for that, but there were a lot of factors around, why that didn't come to be. Honestly, 95 to 99% of books that are options, the films never actually get made. That's just the reality. But I do have other possibilities coming in the future. And the biggest thing for me is that the characters aren't changed to meet somebody else's agenda. And that's exactly what you were talking about with Wonder Woman. The other one that I thought of when you were talking about that was Harley Quinn in the Joker movie. I have not seen the original because the Joker freaks me out in all but they did in the second Harley Quinn movie, The Emancipation of Harley Quinn.
Yeah, of Harley Quinn.
Yeah, the really long title. They showed bits and pieces of I don't know if it was of the original or recreated, but I read an interview with the director, and she said how she purposefully changed Harley Quinn's outfit to make it more realistic, more comfortable for the actress than what she was wearing in the original, which was very much, I hate the phrase, the male gaze. I hate that phrase.
But that's what it is, though.
It is. It's how men see women, and that's why superheroes have the women superheroes have the teeny tiny little outfits that have no armor that would actually protect them, and
exactly
certain body parts. But my stories, I hope, because they are so feminist in nature, I hope it would be hard to change them in that way. They're stories of women, by a woman for women.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I said, it's not that I'm against men, because I'm totally not. There have been some wonderful male allies throughout history.
Of course. It's not an either or proposition. It's
right.
Together we are stronger, because male and female are needed. We are what make up humanity. We are what makes up society. So the stronger women are and can be, the stronger our children, the stronger our families, the stronger society. We have absolutely zero to gain by fighting amongst each other and keeping one another down. And you would think that people want to be the best that they can be, rather than this, whatever this power dynamic struggle is that takes place, because it frees you up. But also, part of it may very well be like what I've told my kids. The flip side of freedom is responsibility. So with every step, we get to ask ourselves, how free do we really want to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add to the responsibility also accountability.
Definitely.
I think we have accountability to each other as women first. I think that if we see other women misbehaving, we should call it out. Whether it's
of course.
I don't know what the word for being anti-gender is, but everybody has a right to their own opinions, yes. But if you are doing harm with those opinions,
right,
you need to be called on it so that you can think about it and you can learn. Some people will never learn. That's just the truth of things.
Exactly. And even that respectfully so, because we do it from a position of value and love. And we live in a society, unfortunately, with the onset of social media, that thinks that the louder you scream, the more just or righteous you are. And no, you can be screaming the loudest and be 100% wrong. So.
Right. Yeah, respect you're totally right on that. Respect is huge, because if we don't respect each other, first of all, if you don't respect yourself,
right,
you can't respect other people. And then if we as women don't respect each other, how can we try to change the world, in the way that we want? Respect and love, to me, go together. They're just such an important basis of everything. And nobody's perfect. I'm not. Of course. Perfect.
And that's not the goal, but you don't have to be perfect to call things what they are. And I think we need more of that. We need these honest discussions if we're going to come together. I think the political correct movement has done nothing but muddy the waters and prevent people from having the necessary conversations that need to take place. What is next on the agenda for you, and how can our listeners reach you?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm currently working on 2 books. One is a biography of Virginia and Francis Minor. They are a husband and wife couple. Good example of there always being allies out there. They're from Virginia, but they lived in St. Louis for 40 years and were very big in the suffrage movement here. Virginia actually started the very first organization in the country, and some people even say in the world, solely dedicated to women's suffrage. She actually beat Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucy Stone to it by 2 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the Women's Suffrage Association of Missouri. The key phrase there being solely dedicated to women's suffrage, because there were other organizations that Anthony and others had started beforehand, but they were also abolitionists. So,
gotcha.
They kind of had a split focus.
Right.
And this will be the first biography of them that's ever been written. There have been profiles, articles, things like that, but
Mm-hmm.
their contribution has been minimized mainly to a Supreme Court case. They were the only people to ever bring the idea of women's suffrage before the U.S. Supreme Court. That was in 1873, and then the decision was actually made in 1875. They were arguing that women actually already had the right to vote under the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment uses, in one part, uses gender neutral language by saying persons, people, citizens,
Right.
rather than men. Yeah, that didn't go over very well.
Imagine that.
Yeah, they argued every which way they possibly could. And I'm writing the chapter right now where they're arguing before the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And, basically the answer was, women are citizens, which that was huge in and of itself, because that was highly debatable up until 1875, almost 100 years after our country's founding, were women actually citizens? But
and this stuff is just so crazy. Like, how can we say people and not think it includes women? Or how can we say, persons or any other word, society, and not think that includes men, women, people of all ethnicities? That's some craftiness out of this world right then and there. That's some gall.
Yeah, it's all arrogance. I mean, for a long time, it was debated both for women and for African Americans.
Right.
I mean, how do you say that a person doesn't have a soul? I mean,
exactly.
I firmly believe that animals have souls. Speaking of, there happens to be a deer right out my window as we speak.
I missed a deer. We have coyotes here, but yeah, I missed a deer in St. Louis. Oh, I love the coyotes.
The other historical fiction that I'm working on, I'm not going to give the exact specifics because it's not close enough to being done yet. But I will say it's related to Hamilton. And it's an untold story as well. And I will say that it's not Eliza. Her story has been told many times, actually by women that I know, and done very well. So,
awesome.
Yeah, but it's in that vein. And what comes after that, I don't know. The characters are fighting, I would probably, at that point, I'm going to ask my agent, which I just got an agent a few weeks ago. I'm
Congrats.
Thank you. I'll ask her, what does the market look like right now? What's being acquired? Because there unfortunately are always trends. Certain time periods hot. Certain time periods they don't touch with a 10-foot pole.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's. I mean, I know what order I want to write them in, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the order they're going to sell in. So
understood. Understood.
As far as where people can reach me, easiest thing is my website, because that's kind of the central hub for everything. And it's just myname.com. So Nicole, Evelina. So you will have 2 E's there in the middle at the end of Nicole and the beginning of Evelina. I always say that so people know that they type it correctly. .com. I'm on all of the major social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, under Nicole Evelina. So all you have to do is search my name. Let's see. I do have an event coming up, and it's a virtual one, obviously, given the times we're living in August. It's on my website under the events tab if anybody is interested. It's actually hosted by one of our local libraries. I will be speaking about how women in Missouri got the right to vote.
So, wow. Okay.
The very first time that suffrage was mentioned, I'll talk about Virginia Minor, obviously, because she was a huge part of it, through Carrie Chapman Catt being here in St. Louis when she called for a League of Women Voters, even though it was officially founded in Chicago a couple of years later. She, the official announcement of it was St. Louis. So, yeah.
Well, Nicole, thank you. We've enjoyed a very rich and insightful discussion today. Thank you so much for being a guest in her company.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. We invite you to become part of this growing platform for women, showcasing how we create, build, and live. to help you answer the question, what's next, and create a plan to get it. Join our email list for opportunities to connect, get involved, and move from transition to transformation. Great things truly do happen when women gather. Till next time, my name is Chris Vaughn. This is In Her Company.